Ham House was built at a time of great social and political upheaval, including the English Civil War, the Reformation, and the development of scientific thought. Some people call this the Age of Reason, hence the name Garden of Reason. I'm Tessa Fitzjohn. I'm the curator of Garden of Reason, a contemporary art programme at Ham House. 17 artists are taking part, 8 major commissions in the gardens, 4 live art commissions taking place over weekends, and a programme of talks and tours from guest curators, historians and artists. The idea of this video is to give some insights into how the programme was made.
I think of the work as inquiries rather than statements. I'm definitely right. I've had an ongoing interest in phonics and what the voice can carry by only guttural sounds or sound. How much more is said than left unsaid with this inarticulation. And that's what the film tackles. And I think when you come to a site like Ham House, those lost fragments of utterings or sounds are hanging about all over the place. At least we know from this. We looked in the house and we looked in the garden. We looked at all the sites where there had been sculpture, no longer sculpture. There was things I saw in the house, like, for instance, there's a little room that's full of miniatures. I think it's called the green room. The ice house, I keep thinking of it as a whole. And because it has this layering and this depth and it's perfect for the whole inquiry of the piece, it is like residue, not just of the ice house, but of the mind and the memory. There's a lot of research behind the work, but in the end, the work comes out as a very singular piece.
My name's Tom Dale. My project for Ham House is going to be a number of casts of lecterns, and they're going to be roughly cast in concrete as if they've been kind of mass-produced in some way. What I was most curious about was this kind of relationship between Cromwell and Lady Elizabeth Dysart, in the way that Ham wouldn't be what it is without her, and it wouldn't be there for us to enjoy today without her. And yet you have kind of Cromwell who's kind of removing these buildings because of what they stand for, in order to sort of return power, I suppose, to the people. So there seemed to be this kind of democracy kind of vacuum there. This was my way of joining the history of Ham with what I see as being the conditions of the present for us. And I suppose what I was asking myself was that, can I make a piece of work, a piece of sculpture that reflects on this notion of participation?
Yes, I'm Louise O'Reilly and I'm an illustrator, and I work primarily with natural history.
I'm Sally Jeffrey. I'm a garden and architectural historian.
I've been asked to create an artist's book that also acts as a guide to the garden. And obviously the garden at Ham is extremely significant. As I understand it, it's the most intact 17th century garden in the UK. And so we're working together on producing a small printed artwork. This could be tools and techniques. The garden in itself is like a visual manifestation of a collection of ideas from the period.
My name is Jeff Freitag. I live locally in Richmond. I'm interested in shape, and I'd never really had the opportunity to explore the garden.
Our kind of collaboration with Spear, which is a local homeless hostel, it was right at the beginning of the project.
To let you get a feel of the garden through the eye of other people.
A very diverse group of people, most of whom hadn't been to Ham before. That my kind of component was to invite them to walk around the garden and see it as I see it as an artist, because there's the generic garden, but there's also the garden that we visit as individuals, which is very different.
Tulips was one of the things that was stolen. That appealed to me because I like history, but it was the commodity that would be the equivalent of someone stealing your Mercedes or your BMW.
I came across information about tulip mania. I just found it really fascinating because it seemed to be so connected to what's going on with today. My name's Kathleen Herbert. I'm really interested in history and social politics, places and spaces around us, and how we read them as a form of like a spatial text.
I think the involvement of contemporary art in kind of heritage settings has a kind of bi-directional effect. sort of salvages history into the present. And also, I think it makes those ideas of the past kind of more fluid, or has a kind of currency. It kind of provokes the ideas of history into sort of being considered anew, and also it provokes the artwork to be kind of re-examined as well.
I was looking at a piece that was looking outwards and not to see the garden as separate from the house. And through further research on tulip mania, I found out that the government produced propaganda, this information that was being pumped out to the masses through leaflets. I wanted to bring them to life, and I decided that a sound piece was the way to go.
Education and learning are integral to Garden of Reason. The interaction programmes provided Ham House with a very positive opportunity to build relationships with groups in the community who've not engaged with the National Trust before, including Ham Multicultural Women's Group and Ham Youth Club. These groups have worked with artists and historians to produce a variety of artworks interpreting the ideas behind the Garden of Reason.
Ready? Yeah.
I'm Lilia and I go to Grey Court School.
And I'm Jan. We're at the Ham Youth Club and we're on a composition course.
And we're recording a soundtrack to go over a video of people doing parkour.
That's good. I'm Johnny Martin. I'm from Rolling Sound. So we've come in to help the guys with this project. So this music's been inspired by the different shapes and forms and ideas behind the gardens themselves.
We've got all the more classical instruments that would have been used in the Baroque era, and then over the top of that we've got saxophone, guitar, drums and singing.
The beauty of it is you can see how it works. The piece will be called YouTube, as in Y-E-W, and will be made up of little units like this. These little model ones have nice sort of, they're cut from styrofoam and work really well. I'm sure reality will be a different thing. So there's a sort of period of a few months of growing to be had. This is the book I got all my optical knowledge from. Yes, Janet and John have built themselves a very similar telescope to mine using a ruler and plasticine. I'm doing a kind of equivalent of that. My name's Graham Miller. I think I've become, in recent years, really interested in the perspective, the point of view of changing the thing as little as possible and shifting perception with as little means as possible.
The wilderness at Ham is very special. The fact that we know exactly what the wilderness looked like. It's got this wonderful diagrammatic plan, but within that it must have been a very wonderful space to walk in, a space to which you could retire, a rather private place.
A geometric form that's containing the wild, really, which is kind of an absurd notion in our terms of thinking about the wilderness. So they can feel like they are in the wild, but they're actually really safe and just behind their house. My name's Ruth Proctor. I respond to spaces in a kind of physical way, objects or lines, performance and space as an idea, creating spaces that people can also interact with, like sporting lines or playful kind of patterns.
So this sort of environment here is all about vistas. It's sort of intersected with diagonal paths, a bit like a sort of layout of the Union Jack or something. You'll be looking through this lens here and seeing upside down at the far end of the garden someone else doing the same and looking at you. You, the audience, are the performer. A certain kind of interaction that's not the push button and see something happen kind of interaction. It's real.
So I'm making a piece of work with floating sculptures, giant globes, but also with patterns, geometric drawings that relate to the designs of the gardens and the house. for instance, the pineapples in the front gardens, which are kind of interesting because of their connection to wealth and power. I'm interested in the time of the 17th century being the age of reason, where Galileo and Newton and lots of scientific discoveries were being made. So playing with gravity and tension. And the piece actually is going to be called The Weight of Air, which relates to Galileo's experiments with weighing air.
Part of what I was trying to achieve with this was making something that conceivably could have been made at the time, a formal conceit, and that sense in gardening of the controlled view.
There was a number of questions I had in my mind when I was approaching this project, especially with it being the English garden, and it being a garden that was very much part of the kind of revolution in garden design, which has this kind of curious connection to the beginnings of cinema, and this idea of visiting a garden and being immersed in a garden, much like the cinematic experience, and the way that when we're in this kind of state, we're able to kind of take on different roles. Very subtly or kind of by proxy of the way it's arranged, you can become another character.
Hi, I'm Harold Offey. A lot of my work kind of looks at kind of representation, identity, in relation to kind of popular culture. During the course of the exhibition at Ham House this summer, I'm going to stage a series of 4 performances that are going to respond to the gardens, the history of the gardens. The garden is obviously kind of an extension, a projection of the owners. And how often gardens are these kind of sort of fantasy spaces, a site to be seen to kind of project an identity or a vision of yourself. So they're inherently performance spaces, I think, and it was really an idea to kind of really kind of bring that aspect of the gardens out and make those really visible to the public, and kind of creating pictures with a population of performers that will take on the role of plants and objects and the topiary. It kind of fitted in with this idea of a kind of 17th century spectacle, wonderment. So it's a kind of animated moving garden.
This kind of use of heritage sites is maybe moving a lot of work away from being just monumental, simply monumental work that is there almost like a sort of corporate logo of history, you know, to maybe sort of begin to kind of poke holes in that and what that might mean. And I think heritage and, you know, art, it's something outside of that. It has to be encountered. You have to be within its presence.
My name is Alexandre da Cunha. My work in general is about found structures or found objects and placing them again in a different context. The whole idea with the ladders started since my first visit here, when I found out more about the history of the garden and about missing sculptures. So I was really intrigued by this idea of sculptures that had at some point a place and they were now missing. So there was a lot to do with the idea of looking for something. With my practice with sculpture, I don't see myself so much as a maker. I work a lot with the idea of using things that they are already there, and I just propose to the viewer to see them differently.
The artists have come into the garden, they've picked up on different elements of the history and have found that fascinating. Why do we do it? We do it because it opens up a discourse. It makes you look at things in a different way.
Well, I've never worked with an artist before, so the whole experience is new, and it's very exciting. And I've spent hours looking at the documents of Ham, which interestingly aren't kept there. They're still with the Ptolemaic family. So I have this knowledge of hundreds of documents, and here was Louise who wanted the information and needed it, and we could make something of it. So it's been just a very exciting collaboration. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed it.
And so I have at my disposal Sally's expertise, which I haven't had before as an illustrator and an artist, and it adds a whole dimension that simply could not have been there for me if I'd been doing it on my own.
And making different designs.
If you get taken around somewhere by somebody who is an enthusiast for and knows a lot about and loves the place they're showing you, there couldn't be a better way of being introduced to somewhere. So what do we think if we were talking to somebody and taking them round? What would we tell them?
I suppose it undermines the sense that history is chronological, that actually becomes more cyclical. It's almost like a kind of quicksand of time, kind of throwing these things up again, and that rather than sort of feeling like that we're just confounded by what we see in the present around us, that there are sort of things to be learned or answers to be gleaned from the past.